Good afternoon to everybody. My name is Bev West, and I'm Director of Client Strategy at Sterling Seacrest Partners. We're a multi-discipline commercial insurance agency with deep industry verticals in healthcare, construction, real estate, hospitality, transportation logistics, nonprofits, and private client risk. We also have a large benefits consulting practice, which is industry agnostic. Several of my colleagues are in attendance today as well, if you'd like to raise your hands. Okay. Welcome and thank you for taking the time to come out today and join us or join remotely. We're excited about our program on next-gen cyber insurance and fun with ransomware. I'm sure we'll learn, if you don't know all those terms, we'll learn about that here during the course of our lunch and learn. We'll cover cyber threats, cyber insurance, recent cyber breaches, and how to prevent attacks. Jeremiah Grossman, a professional hacker and advisor to cyber risk underwriters, will show us how hackers operate and how to protect ourselves. Jeffrey Smith, managing partner of Cyber Risk Underwriters, will instruct us on the cyber coverage options available. Jeremiah Grossman is a professional hacker and founder of White Hat Security and Bit Discovery. He is also an off-road race car driver and black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Jeffrey Smith, who I have known forever, is a self-proclaimed insurance geek and hacker wannabe with Cyber Risk Underwriters. Cyber Risk Underwriters provides cyber and risk and insurance solutions to retail insurance agency and InfoSec vendors that help improve outcomes related to protecting digital assets. They simplify things for their clients so they can focus on their business. We welcome Jeremiah and Jeffrey.
Thanks, Bev. That was formal.
Thank you, Katie, for the script.
I'm Jeffrey Smith. And before I tell you a little bit about my shop, I want to get started. So, hack yourself first. It's like, what does that mean? What does that mean in terms of cyber insurance and working with your customers? The overriding theme of my piece is get to the bottom of the risk. Get to the bottom of the risk. Get to the bottom of understanding it. Now, in my background with Bev, and my background previous was a large accounts producer. I work mostly on what I call actuarialized accounts. And so for example, you can get to the bottom of workers' comp because you're going to have a lot of data. If you don't have your own data, you can have industry data that your actuary can go and pull. You'll have hundreds of thousands of files to work with. So a good example is I worked on a lot of long-term care risks. And we got to the point, I don't know what the rate is now, but if you were under $2.50, if that was your loss rate determined by the actuary, you were good. If you're above that, you needed some improvement. But we could even put a finer, we could drill down even further because we had data. If you were an operator and you went to a no lift zone, which in a nursing home environment means that there are no individual physical lifts of residents. They use these lifting machines. So we knew if they went to 100% lift-free zone, they were going to come in around $1.60. So we knew that, right? So we were able to get to the bottom of that risk. You can't get to the bottom of this risk. This is not workers' comp. There's not data, right? So our company, after a lot of research, we set the company up in 2016. Instead of going out and getting a bunch of old insurance guys that look like Bev West on my advisory board, I spent a lot of time getting to know some renowned hackers. And so I thought, well, if we're going to really help agents and insurers better understand their exposures and structure insurance around their exposure based upon the actual exposures, I needed to have some people who knew how to hack and understood where the vulnerabilities were, how to identify them, how to address them. So we do a few things. We do the retail distribution. We do a lot of healthcare. We do a lot of real estate. We've done a lot of stuff in technology risk, and we've done some.
I just want to go about finding hackers.
One does some research, one picks up the phone and calls them. And then I spent some time at Black Hat and DEF CON to get to know the space. And I could back up a little bit on that point. That's a great question. I can answer that. But real quick, our products are, we saw an opportunity to actually, in addition to distributing the traditional cyber insurance through the retail insurance channel, we've actually found opportunities to actually distribute the excess cyber capacity through information security channels we call InfoSec. So these are companies that provide, security services for their vendors who are, maybe they're an endpoint antivirus sort of product. So we figured out some new ways to actually distribute through those vehicles or those channels, because in a lot of instances, we found that it's a lot easier for a security professional to understand how a policy would respond to event costs. And it was easier for them to understand that in some instances than it was for an insurance agent to understand information security. So another way to connect it. What are we going to talk about? We saw an opportunity to improve, better distribute, cyber insurance, and hopefully add more value to the products by bringing these folks in. What we concluded was, one, in terms of the middle market, and SMEs, we focus mainly on small and middle market enterprises. Under $500 million revenue, most of our customers are under 200 million in revenues. A lot of them are, small folks that spend under, $5,000. We've got a handful that spend above $30,000. But that's primarily what we play, and we don't discriminate. We can write betting accounts, write Bitcoin exchanges, write strip clubs, whatever. So the problem that we saw was one that the pitch was the insurance industry has one solution to everything, right? Let's turn insurance policies, and here's some adjusting services. Now, granted, in the cyber insurance space, those adjusting services are set up, and we got these, cyber panel people, and we've got, these computer forensics people, whatnot. But the basic premise of the product is the same as any other, commercial insurance product you get. So there was a lot of friction in the underwriting process. So originally you had these long, applications that caused a lot of friction. A lot of buyers had said, I don't want to fill out the app, I don't care. That's too much for me to handle. And then in the underwriting process, there's no actionable information. There's nothing like, getting back to the workers' comp example, there's nothing that says, well, you can hard look at this and, these people in this facility aren't using bullets, as an example. Or, in the HPR fire example, you have sprinklers there. You don't have water now. Silly stuff like that. But there was no actual information that came out of the underwriting process that actually helped the insurance improve their exposure. There was no ongoing protection. So, if, we'll talk about alignment of interest here in a second, but the alignment of interest between the insurer and insured was pretty poor, in my view. They had the interest that the insured had the interest that, hey, I don't have a claim, but if I have a claim, I call you and you take care of everything. But the insured didn't have skin in the game in terms of actually providing ongoing service to keep you from having a claim in the first place. So those are some of the things that we saw, along with the distribution issue that I touched on. I'm going to talk about, let me get back to the agenda here. I'm going to talk about the next generation, we see it, of underwriting and cyber insurance. Jeremiah's going to get on here, I think he's going to join us in about 20 minutes or so. And he's going to be much more interesting than me. But he's going to talk about the similarity between Somali pilots and Ransomware. And it's a lot of fun.
So SMEs need more than just a cyber policy.
primarily because, they don't have the resources to, a lot of them, especially the ones under, say, 40, 50 million, they they'll buy an antivirus, they'll buy a firewall. They may or may not have some ongoing monitoring. The problem with antiviruses and firewalls is they kind of stink, and Jeremiah will go into that in a bit more detail. But as of now, I was out at DEF CON and Black Hat. Black Hat is kind of the RIMS for information security. So it's more about, it's kind of about selling, they have the big exhibit hall. And so I've been to a couple of those. We actually have a breakfast where we invite CISOs, which are, corporate insurance, security officers. And we have panel discussions with them. We have big breakfast, we have them, and we have vendors in, and we talk about their opinions on cyber insurance. And then we talk about, software warranties, which we're going to talk about in a second. And when you talk to them, they're going to tell you, antivirus doesn't work. It'll help, it'll keep some stuff out, but if somebody wants in, they'll get in. And the firewall, they'll say, don't get me started. So, and then only 34% of SMEs, have the, the security in place to actually prevent, a claim, or at least even mitigate it, or even find out about it soon enough to keep the financial expense down. Now, our vision is, we think, like a lot of people, that cyber insurance is going to become a standard part of any business insurance portfolio. But we don't think it's going to be in the current form as just an insurance policy and, supporting claim services. Cyber insurance is going to be underwritten by hackers as opposed to CPCUs. We'll get into that in a second. They're going to provide assessment tools. They're going to provide ongoing threat monitoring. So during the course of the policy period, if somebody's pinging your system, you're going to get an alert. If one of your employees' credentials goes up for sale on the dark net, you're going to get an alert. There'll be some patch management security involved in that. It'll vary by, by product. But that's where we see it going. And it's even conceivable from our view that you may see insurance companies starting to buy what we call MSSPs, which are managed security service providers. They're like security brokers. So for small to middle market companies, they'll outsource to these MSSPs, and the MSSPs will build what we call a security stack, which means they'll have antivirus, a firewall, they'll have what we call threat intelligence, and some other data loss prevention, and some other services in there, and they monitor it through this big fancy place called a Security Operations Center. That's where we see it going. Okay, let's talk about antivirus and firewalls and what's out there. There are, let me start with this quote, great quote. This is a guy well known in the business. There are only two products not covered by product liability: religion and software. And software ain't gonna last much longer. So if your Norton antivirus doesn't work, you can't pick up the phone and call Norton and say, hey, my computer got bricked, I want you to buy a new computer. Or here, take your software back, I don't like it. They're not gonna, it ain't happening. So I don't know if you noticed that, but if you buy one of these products that don't work, no refunds. So we call them an $80 billion garage sale. I'm not saying there aren't great products out there that don't work, but the point is the industry does not stand behind their products, not now. Okay, but the bad guys do. This is my second favorite slide in this deck. This is true. So you can actually go online, and I found this. Jeremiah found it first, and then he said, see if you can find it, and I found it. So I can go online and buy a piece of malware for $250, right? And that's bad stuff. That's stuff that I infect your system with, and I try to lock you out of your proposals and everything else. I can buy it for $250. If it doesn't work, if it's detected by any antivirus program, they're going to give me my money back. Now that's a better deal than you get from the guy you're buying your antivirus from. Okay, this is my favorite slide. Okay, let's talk about cyber insurance today. Let's talk about what's out there, how it's done, and everything else. Now, this is your actuary here, and he's like the emperor with no clothes. he wants to add value, but in the traditional sense, he's got nothing. I think the largest claims database that I know out there is held by Advisant. And I like to give them a hard time because they're good sports. Their database, 50 to 75,000 claims. The problem is I haven't bought it. I've heard the quality of it is suspect. So it'd be like buying a bunch of workers' comp claim files that didn't have all the fields filled in. So it's of limited value. I also like to make fun of them because they're back here and she's actually having fun because the funny thing when I got in this business, when I was in commercial insurance, they never had a bull and machinery man of the year, right? There was never a workers' comp man of the year. But, you know, Advisant and there's a group in the UK, they have these awards dinners and these award ceremonies. And they give away Cyber Man of the Year and Cyber Broker of the Year and all this other stuff, which I found amusing. And so I like to give them a hard time about that. But they're making money. It's all about making money. If you talk to chief underwriting officer of one of the larger underwriting facilities and get them to talk off the record, they say, well, they're making a pile of money doing it. That's why they're doing it. They get $800 a seat, $10,000 a table. But they're a lot of fun. They're good people, and they do have a lot of good information. And then this is you. So you're out in the car saying, man, I'm going to sell this stuff, right? So the actuary doesn't know what he has. You know, there are people out there trying to sell you information that you may or may not understand, that may or may not have specific value to your particular risk. And then, you know, then you have agents trying to do the best they can to give your portfolio the protection. Okay, a guy named Sasha Romanowski, who I spent a little time with, you know, one of the brilliant people. Rand was engaged to do a study on how cyber insurance is underwritten. And so they did this exhaustive, you know, analysis. I don't know how many hundreds of pages it is. They get down into the bowels of, you know, the underwriting development factors, and then they get into the credits for different types of security that's in play. But after all that, here are my favorite quotes from underwriters. We're not using claim costs as a basis of credibility because we have not experienced any claims in the last 3 years. That's an underwriter. In only a few cases where the underwriter is confident in their own experience to develop pricing models. Further, this is my favorite one, and it happens all the time. It's not a procedure for carriers to examine their competitors to define rates. And in some cases, the carrier appears to guess. And that's the way it is right now. They don't have enough data. They don't know how to price it. And I mean, I think the largest, you know, Beasley and some of these other facilities, they're starting to see a few thousand claims a year, but it's not a huge database. It doesn't mean claims aren't happening. It's just most of them aren't insured and most of them aren't reported because people don't want you to know about it, but they're out there. Okay, and here's your first go hack yourself. I think I missed one here real quick. Did I? May have missed two. Okay, quick story. Go hack yourself. I'm going to have little anecdotes here. We were working on, I got an agent in Arizona who sends us a lot of business. And he called me up and said, Jeffrey, I got this. It's called an API. It's an application programming interface thing. So they're for the travel industry. And basically what that is if Sterling Seacrest wanted to have their own web page where you would arrange your business travel, you would use their page, and then they put Expedia and Travelocity on that behind it, so you do it yourself. So the agent was having a problem because not only did they not want to, they kept turning down the cyber insurance, they didn't even buy Techie and So I didn't quite understand the risk, so I called Robert, one of my hackers. So I said, Robert, I don't understand this. Can you take a look? So he did his thing, and he didn't, we'll talk about the difference between passive scanning and invasive scanning, but he'll do what's called a passive scan, and then he'll go into the web and do some intelligence. And so the first thing he found out, he called me up and said, Jeffrey, don't underwrite this with your money. I said, well, I never do. But I said, why? And he said, well, this one's all messed up. And he covered, there's some housekeeping stuff like security certificates and whatnot, which basically makes sure that people going to your site, if you're taking money or doing transactions, that it's safe. There were a couple of the housekeeping issues, and then he said, I want you to go to this landing page. And I went to a landing page. It's where their clients would log in. And he drew my attention at the bottom of the page to a bunch of Chinese symbols. And he said, click on it. And I clicked on it. It took me to the Chinese government website. And so I called the CFO, and I called the agent, and I said, get the CFO and the CEO on the phone. And my first question then was, are you guys arranging travel for the Chinese government? And the response was, what you talking about, Willis? Right? And somebody was parked on their side. So we were able to clean it up. They also had some compromised credentials, which we'll talk about in a minute. So we were able to clean it up, and the agent closed the deal pretty quick. So that's kind of our first hack yourself first. Does anybody know, a lot of markets, particularly Beasley, make a big pitch in their marketing about breach notification. And they have some sexy alternatives where they can tell you, instead of giving you a limit for it, they'll say, well, here's how many, hundreds of thousands of people will notify. But they make a big deal out of that, and it's important. But does anybody know what the uptake is on credit monitoring after insured breach? It's under 10%. So to put that in perspective, so if Anthem had 1 million files breached, there may have only been 100,000 people whose files were breached that actually took them up on the annual credit monitoring. So I think the reason is not that it's not a good service, but I think the reason is that people are just like, I'm not damaged. I'm not damaged yet, and I've already got a lock on it, or I've already got a service, or I don't see value in it.
Do you see value in it?
It depends.
Most people, I agree, most people just look at it and be like, yeah, I get one of these every 6 months. Credit, sorry for person.
Yeah, that's a personal decision. I've always kind of had something, through my bank that they would kind of let me know. But in terms of, I have not had any, healthcare provider or target anybody call me and say, hey, your stuff's been hacked. So I don't know how I'd respond, but I'd probably not take them up on it because I already have something in place. So I think people are kind of resigned to the fact that there are no secrets anymore. Now, if somebody hacks your credit card or your medical file, that's a problem, and a lot of you already know that here. And this question, what do you mean 200 of my employees' credentials are for sale? So what I mean by that is sometimes when we run these things, or our partners run them, on one of them we found 200 employee emails. They sent us a list, and their credentials were for sale, which means that somebody had stolen their credentials, they had their passwords, and they were for sale. Right? And what do you mean? What do you mean? Like, what can we tell you? That when you get off the phone, make them change their passwords, please. Okay. In terms of today's cyber insurance, this is your first time with this complete slide deck. Before I do this, let me tell you about a couple of my adventures at Black Hat and DEF CON. I think I got off track there. So again, Black Hat is like the big vendor thing with that presentations, a lot like RIMS. And so they have an expo floor. And, so they got, hundreds of these vendors. And so I started on the right because I wanted to learn. So I went to the far right and I started asking the same question to every booth. And I got about 2/3 of the way across in 2.5 days. And there are all these different products. And I had the same question. And I say, hey, I'm an insurance guy. I don't understand anything here. Can you explain to me an 8th grade level what your product does? And there may be 10 of them, there may be 60 of them I talked to that could explain it in terms that I understood. So the point is, it's a big issue. And we're going to talk about fear, uncertainty, and doubt, FUD, in a second. But there's a lot of that. So anecdotally, the great thing about Black Hat is that the DEF CON conferences, toward the end, when Black Hat ends, there's a thing called a DEF CON conference. So if Black Hat is the college campus, DEF CON is the frat party. So DEF CON, you've probably heard about it. This is where all the hackers go. They may not be white hat hackers, which are good people. They may be Black Hat hackers. But it was fascinating. I watched them hack automobiles. I watched them hack a voting booth. Took them a couple hours, but they pulled the board out. and they're hooking stuff up, and these, some of these were, 20-year-olds. And hooking the stuff up, next thing you know, they're pulling data off it. So it's pretty crazy. The first thing I learned is turn your Bluetooth off and ideally turn your phone off, right? And don't use the public Wi-Fi. The other thing is I went over to get my DEF CON ticket, and I came back, and my guys were waiting on me. They said, hey, where you been? And I said, well, I went over to Caesars to get a ticket for DEF CON. And they looked at me and said, you didn't go dressed like that, did you? And I had like the whole Tommy Bahama golf garb on. I said, yeah, why? He says, nobody's going to talk to you. You're CIA. Nobody's going to talk to you. Right? But what I learned from those two experiences, and we're going to be going every year, is that, as we say, 99% secure is still 100% vulnerable. And all of them would tell you. And there's overlap in their products, and there's as much confusion, if not more. I feel bad for risk managers sometimes having to sort through the cyber stuff and understand it because it's very different. But the people who buy the security, I feel worse for them. So today's cyber insurance is a static solution to dynamic problems. Does anybody have a TiVo box shoved under where their smart TV is now? Right? Okay. Well, that's kind of what I equate the situation with current cyber insurance. They're throwing this insurance policy and claim services at a problem that's evolving. So we know everything there is about fire. One of my first career stops was with one of the factory mutual companies, and we take customers up to this big burn center, and we'd set stuff on fire, and then put sprinklers on, all that stuff. We know about everything there is to know about fire. We know about everything there is to know about slip and falls. We don't know much at all about cyber risk. Again, getting to the bottom of the risk. We talked about the alignment of interest. The point is, the question is, it's right now the customer says, you should buy this because what if you have a claim? And the point is, you don't want a claim. You got a product that is reactive and not agile, and we'll talk more about that in a second. Now, so if you can't actuarialize it, you awfulize it, right? And FUD means fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So when you have a paucity of claims data, to go to your insured to say, hey, if you put the lifts in here and you use them, you're $1.60, you're not $2.50. So it's always it's not if, it's when. The average SMB breach is under $1 million. Target, Home Depot, Anthem. Does anybody know what the cost per file of those three claims were? Anybody want to guess? The breach cost per file? $4 to $6. So if you go into their filings like I did, you take what they've booked, you divide it by the files, $4 to $6. And the people who are making money, as you can imagine, are the lawyers and the states. So they make the big coin. Then there's this other one, 65% of SMEs go out of business if they have a breach. I had an agent use that pitch when I was on the phone with him and his insured. His insured said, can you name one? I'm sure they're out there, but I can't name one. And then the breach costs $200 per record. It can. Now that can be true. If you're healthcare, I've got some examples that I can shoot over here. We do a lot in healthcare. I've got a background in healthcare. There have been, we have seen files up to $1,000 for little tiny healthcare entities that lost 1,000 files, but they were doing some bad stuff. And so they got hammered by, with fines and penalties through HIPAA. So that can happen. But this is your typical cell. When you get to the average breach and the cost per record, the problem with that is the data sets that the people who are doing these studies work with are trivial. So Ponyman is the big one in the industry. They do this annual, cyber risk cost analysis. IBM just bought them. They liked them. The first year they came out, I think it was last year before last, they had 178 files. And they're throwing this out there, the general public saying, well, it's $300 a file. And then you get in, because I'm like the actual piece, I get in, read the fine print, and they say, well, our data set was, 178 files. And they're from, all different types of companies. Again, it doesn't mean that claims aren't happening. it means that a lot of them aren't getting reported. But again, when in doubt, sell the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And I think that's, there's a point of diminishing returns with that approach. So the current underwriting model, the credentials are CPCU. A lot of the folks, except for the ones really early in their career, they may have written crime or D&O or, one of the management liability lines. The way they assess the profile is they send you a questionnaire. And a lot of you have seen them. Some of them go from, hey, it's 5 questions, I'm a small company, to, and that's easy, to, this is completely annoying, I don't want to fill this out, I don't understand it, I don't need this insurance. So what do? A typical, rate times value. That's what they do with credits. So they have a base rate, usually driven off revenue. Sometimes it's file count. It really depends on the type of risk. They modify it for what they think they know about that exposure class and about security protections they have. The problem is they don't have efficacy data on those things. They think, well, at least they have this, and the other guys we look at don't. And then they go, as we talked about with the RAND study, they'll go out to the market and say, hey, Jeffrey, what's the other guy quoting? What's the other guy quoting? Help me be competitive. And then they do no proactive hunting. They don't go out and look at your insured's risk and try to hunt down stuff and find stuff that may be a threat to them, and then include that in the underwriting proposal. So again, getting to the bottom of the risk. Okay. Apple is worth $1 trillion, $1 trillion, and the dongle costs extra. So I don't know if you knew this, but does anybody have one of the new $1,300 iPhones yet? Nobody? They charge you extra for the dongle, the little thing that makes your old earbuds work with the new phone. So it used to be included. It was included, right? But now you got to pay for it. And what I don't like about the wireless earbuds is that I'm going to lose them, and I'm old, right? But I'm going to lose those wireless buds, and then instead of it costing me $60, for a new set of earbuds, it's going to cost me a few $100s to replace that, that wireless set. So I guess the point is that what we're going to talk about in a second in terms of service ads with the current product is they usually cost extra. The good ones that keep you protected cost extra. They'll say, hey, we got a great deal with BitSight, and use them. But can anybody guess what the utilization rate of the risk portal offerings are? Anybody? Okay. At least, maybe. Because they get the insurance and they're out of there. And like, well, if I got to pay extra for it, I don't want it. So let's talk about the value adds. They all have vetted claims panels and panel providers. Okay, so you'll notice when you get the policies, they'll have the glossy marketing slick in the back, and it will give you an overview of who the breach counsel is. It'll give you an overview over who the computer forensics people are going to go in your system to figure out what happened, and the remediation people are going to fix your data, and what have you. They're vetted. They're terrific. They're all. I've met a lot of these vendors, and they're really, really talented folks. There's no actionable information from the underwriting process. You're not going to get with a traditional cyber insurance product right now. You're not going to get anything back from them that says, "Hey, these credentials are for sale," or we found exposed servers with ransomware on them sitting there, and they didn't even know they had those servers still open. So, like, I'm talking about websites. We'll talk about that in a minute. They all have some level of educational resources. Some have really cool online tools where you get your employees and you can make it lunch and learn, where they go through and, every quarter, whatever, they get up to speed on how not to click on stuff and other, sort of similar tactics. But they don't keep you protected from the policy period. That is the one thing about the product right now that I think needs to change. So, next-gen cyber insurance. I did a lot of med-mal work for large risk, and one of the things we learned was that if I'm an underwriter, if you're underwriting medical malpractice, would you rather have a file that has his credentials, where he's worked, the fact that he's got a clean proceedings, state record, that here's where he went to school, blah blah blah, or would you rather have a 15-minute videotape of this physician interacting with his patient. I want the videotape, because what I learned is that people don't sue doctors necessarily because they make mistakes. They sue doctors because they don't like that doctor. So we would see claims where somebody would sue the surgeon, but not sue the primary care physician who provided the diagnosis, right? And so when they're asked, why did you sue the surgeon, not the primary care physician, they say, well, we like him. We like that guy. So what I'm getting at here is if you go take a snapshot of what their system looks like and what their vulnerabilities might be, and then clean it up, that's a much better way to price the product, right? So basically the product's going from reactive to agile. So again, during the policy period, if it's set up right and everybody's doing what they're supposed to do, it's going to keep you safe. And again, hunters versus gatherers right now. The underwriters, they gather information from you. That's all they do. The next gen are, as I mentioned, you're going to have these hackers going out and getting information. And this is non-evasive. And we'll get to that in a second. It's a less complicated pitch. So instead of going out and saying, hey, it's not if, it's when, or Target, Anthem, Home Depot, which I haven't met too many SME buyers that I've been in touch with that actually can relate to that. They just can't relate to it. The pitch is, hey, we've got a solution for you. So you're going to get this insurance, but their interests are going to be aligned. They're going to help keep you safe during the policy period. Here's a comparison. The underwriter credentials, I think, are going to go from CPCU to a hacker. And when I talk about hackers, hacker's a good word. A lot of people hear the word hacker and they think bad guy, the Shutterstock, pictures that all these folks use with the bad guy with the hood on and he's typing in. No, they're white hat hackers like Jeremiah, who actually find vulnerabilities in companies and help you fix them. That's mostly what a hacker is. There are criminal hackers, for sure. But when I use the term hacker, I'm talking about the good guys. The exposure assessment, instead of being application-based, it's going to be evidence-based because they're going to go out and get information to get to the bottom of the risk. The rating process, again, the differences are, now, we'll use market, right? I mean, you got to be competitive, but at least there can be some justification based upon the actual assessment of the risk. And again, down here, when we talk about proactive hunting, Jeremiah's new company actually is in the business of asset inventory. And so the way that works is he's basically downloaded the entire internet. And so what he's able to do, if you go and ask a CISO, do they know what all their assets are? And an asset in this sense means, let's say, websites. And most of them will, if they're honest, they'll say, no, we don't know all of them because we've grown, we've added companies, what have you. So I'll give you an example. We looked at one, it was a large schedule, and I was talking to the agent, and I had him ask the buyer, how many websites do you have, how many assets do you have out there? And he said 20. Well, when we did the scan, there were 70 that they didn't know about. So a lot of them were dormant, like they bought a company and they had an old website, but it was still open. It was a problem, so they were still vulnerable. So that's what I mean by proactive hunting. And in terms of comparison, I say know better stuff. Again, the panel providers, the actual information, the educational resources, and does it keep the insured safe? And I apologize, my slides didn't translate into PowerPoint very well. So here's some new coverage enhancements that we're starting to see as a result. Hardware. So we worked on a risk that was in, it was a large healthcare system. They got hacked. And the way the story goes is they were asked for $30,000 ransom. And the FBI got involved and the buyer said, no, we're not paying the ransom. So a lot of people were like going, why wouldn't you just pay the ransom? And the reason they didn't is that they realized in the process that they had to replace their whole system anyway. And so bricking means that your hardware is actually no longer trustworthy. So a lot of times in getting your hardware and they'll say, hey, pay the ransom, we'll give you the key, you can get back to your data. The problem is a lot of times the data gets queered just through the encryption, and then a lot of your servers, you know, on your desktops can be rendered untrustworthy, so you have to replace them. So we're looking at providing, you know, hardware cover. Service fraud, how many of you have heard of Bitcoin mining? Well, Bitcoin thing, yeah. So, you know, they need a lot of power, you know, to do the mining, to keep the accounting. You know, Bitcoin, in my view, simpleton, is it's basically a virtual accounting database. And so to record, you know, transactions, they have to go, you know, they have to do a lot of what's called mining to find the Bitcoin and to create the transaction. So they will get on your system and steal your electricity. So, and we've seen some of these files where an insurance, like on my power bill, went up 30-fold. And you get into it and you realize that somebody's hacked their system and they're using their power. Contingent pollution. Fraudulent funds is a big deal. We've been doing a lot of lawyers, and the problem that lawyers have, especially ones who are doing transactional work, they're really concerned about fraudulent frauds transfer. They're concerned about getting phished, and they're concerned about sending money to a place that they shouldn't send it. The problem is, up till it was just not a year ago, most of the traditional carriers would give you 100,000, 250 sublimit on that. That's it. I know crime in general. Right now, we can get $1 million on these risks, and actually, if the risk is right, because of the work that we can do on the front end, we can get maybe up to 10 million. But we've put out 2 million on a lot of legal risks. I will caveat that with, if they're doing title services, I might be able to get you $1 million. And then this is kind of cool. So when you look at your cyber policy, it has business interruption coverage. So if you get shut out of your system, or if you're doing, if you're taking money on an online site, if you're an online retailer, and a bunch of people shut your site down, there's business interruption coverage. Some of them are the markets who are actually going out and getting to the bottom of the risk. They are able to provide an enhanced wait period for the workers, for the business interruption. Some of them can get down to 0 if either they like the risk or if you use one of their protection systems for your website. So ideally, with these new products, it's not up in here. It ain't going to happen up in here, and if it does, we're going to jump right on it. So the threat monitor, the ongoing threat monitor, is kind of like your security guard. The patch management identifies if you have leaks. If there's a new version of Microsoft that you haven't installed, there's a potential leak there. The credential monitoring, has somebody lost the keys to the kingdom? That's what that represents. You know, anti-ransomware it can be included in some of these. So, you know, getting locked out of your own house is how ransomware works. The DDoS mitigation, DDoS is a distributed services attack where if they don't like you in your online retailer, they would take over 1 million machines, and then they would all go to the site at the same time, so nobody can get there. So the question there is, where did all this traffic come from? And then the bug bounty vulnerability disclosure program, that's something that would be better explained by Jeremiah, but that's basically where you put a bounty out for your company. So let's say Sterling Seacrest said, hey, we're going to put out a bounty. We're going to pay $5,000 to anybody, you know, any of these hackers who are qualified for this provider if they find something in our system that's a problem. So the new pitch with the engineered cyber solution that I'm referring to is InfoSec fails all the time. You can't get your money back. Hackers with these new, the next generation are going to kick the tires and help you plug the holes. They have security experts. A lot of these are ex-NSA, ex-CIA. We had some folks on the call yesterday who were ex-Air Force, who were involved in the space now to help protect you. And if that doesn't work, we got your back. You know, we got the insurance in place. And oh, by the way, it's all included in the premium. So that kind of summarizes my part. So if there are any questions, maybe actually let's wait and get Jeremiah on, let him do his thing.
I'm on the line.
Hey, Jerry.
Hey, good morning, everybody.
So let me introduce Jeremiah Grossman. I met Jeremiah. Jeremiah
had started a company called White Hat, which was an Army hackers, and they would go in, as mentioned, they would go into companies and find vulnerabilities. And I met Jeremiah because he was evangelical about information security standards product. So I reached out to him, and I'm fortunate enough now to call him one of our advisors, and he helps us ideally differentiate, our service offerings from our competitors. With that, Jared, go nuts.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for your time. Just so I know what my parameters are here. How much time do I have? I want to be respectful of everybody's time.
I think you have about 30 minutes.
Okay. So are you going to present the slides?
Hey, Jared.
Yeah.
Jared, can you accept the screen and take over?
Yeah. Let me see here. Share my screen. Okay. 1 second. Let me get everything going here. One sec. I got it covered. Okay. Okay, look at that. Sorry for the delay. Okay. Okay. Share my screen. Oh, it wants me to add something. That's bigger.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
Let's see here. Application window. Here we go. That one. All right. I think that does it. How's that looking? Let's see here.
You're there.
All right. All good?
Now you're not.
All right. What's that?
Now you're there. You're good.
Oh, wait. Oh, wait. Okay, I screwed it up. 1 sec. Okay. All right. So my name is Jeremiah Grossman. I've been in information security for about 20 years. To tell you the brief abridged story, how I got into the space and how I became a professional hacker and who I am. I've been programming since I was about 8. In 16, I got in all kinds of trouble because I hacked something I shouldn't have. And fortunately, that didn't end my career, kind of started my career. But when I was 18, I got a Unix administration job for a large biotech firm in Thousand Oaks, California called Amgen. And my job there was because this is 98. And my job there, because early days of the web, was to make all their old Unix systems web enabled to make everything efficient. Because even by that time, I was about 18, 19. I'd grown up with the web. I knew how to build websites and build web code and things like that. And it took me a couple of months to find my feet, but I automated myself down to about 15 minutes of work per week because I knew how to code really well. But they didn't know any different, and it gave me time to do my electronics engineering homework during the day and go to school at night. And because I stayed pretty busy all the time, one night I went home and everybody has hobbies, riding bikes, playing video games, whatever people do. My passion is breaking things, breaking software. So I signed up myself a new Yahoo Mail account, logged out, and proceeded to try to break into it to see if I could. After about 15 minutes of work, I found a way in to my own account without a password, which if I took it forward, I could have broken into 120 million other users' accounts at the same time to read all their mail. And that was my victory for the evening. That was my crossword puzzle. I won. And I sent a note to Yahoo anonymously saying, I found this issue. You hear the details. You might want to fix it. And I went on about my day. When I got into work the next morning, I had a response back from Yahoo thanking me for finding the issue. And they had a couple of questions and wanted to send me a T-shirt for my trouble. And for me, that was like the coolest day ever. And, really did it for me. And they said, if you know of any more issues, please let us know. And I took that as tacit permission to completely destroy Yahoo and hack them every way I possibly could. So over the next week, I found about a half dozen more issues where I could achieve the same thing. And later I came to find out that I was talking to the head of engineering over at Yahoo, which just happened to be one of the two founders, the $8 billion man at the time. And I guess rather than calling the cops on me or something like that, or sticking the lawyers on me, they decided to offer me a job. So 3 weeks later, I was the hacker Yahoo was my official title at Yahoo, and with the loose mission to hack everything Yahoo had, preferably before the bad guys. I spent 2 years doing that, trying to babysit 120 million users, where 1% of our user base was malicious. So my job was to try to defeat 1.2 million bad guys. So I didn't sleep for like 2 years. What I took from Yahoo when I left 2 years later to start White Hat Security is that we needed to hack all things at all times before the bad guys did. And so I started White Hat Security with that particular mission. And over the years, I grew the largest web hacker army, private web hacker army there was. I had hundreds of hackers deployed with the most modern cutting edge tools that we could develop. And we had to get out of jail free card to hack hundreds of banks and retailers all across the world. So that was fun for 15 years. But we're going to talk today about, that's me. So, but in the meantime, I've personally hacked Yahoo and Facebook and Google and things like that. But, always for benevolent means. So today we're going to talk about one of the things that really concerns me, and I kept it going, is something called ransomware, which Jeffrey talked a lot about. So this is briefly my background, how people know me. I get to speak all around the world. I've spoken on 6 of the 7 continents in about 12 countries. It's my claim to fame there. We're going to talk about ransomware, and these are not, most of the time we're used to looking at when we see ransom notes, but this is not the same thing. We're talking about bad guys who infect your systems, they encrypt your data, and it turns out the ones who are likely to pay the most ransom for your data is the victim, you. And here's the stat that really, really shook me, that really told me that this is the place where we need to focus energy on. The FBI recently published that ransomware victims, and you have to look at the dates on this around, that ransoms were paid out $209 million in Q1 as, so if you play it forward, about $800 million in ransoms compared to $24 million for all of 2015. That told me the bad guys had shifted their tactics, and we better get ahead of this, otherwise we're going to be in a real bad way. So I was following the bad guys' business models. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that ransomware is not a new thing. It's been around since 1989, technically speaking, and the first form of ransomware, a virus, was actually in a 5 1/4 floppy, for those that remember this stuff. There was about 20,000 of these disks originally developed and shipped, and there's only one known copy left in existence. And I've been trying to find my hands on one of the other ones, but I've been skunked every time. So I know this guy. I offered him $5 grand for that disc right there, because I wanted an original, but he won't give it up because it's the only known copy. So if anybody in the room happens to know of one of these, where I can get one of these, please let me know. All right. So what do these ransom notes look like? They come in all shapes and sizes. You get infected, it encrypts your data, and then it blasts with one of these screens, and it tries to scare you and motivate you to pay and pay quickly, typically in Bitcoin. They'll use all kinds of imagery. They'll use scary things like the Guy Fawkes mask. They'll even use Angela Merkel and Trump if that sufficiently motivates. So they come in all shapes and sizes, and there's at least 16 to 18 very popular ransomware families right now, and all the variants fall underneath that. So it's pretty diverse. Ransomware has impacted just about every major industry that there is, and the damage it is causing is very real and it is very serious. And we're going to talk about a couple of these cases just to make it very real for you, because if there's a top 3 problems in computer security, ransomware is definitely one of them. So we're going to go through some examples. Also, I tend to talk very, very quickly because I get excited about it and we go through a lot of data. So Jeffrey, if you can help me out here, if there's questions in the room, just stop me and please ask. Fair enough? All right. We're going to start with some very, very minor impacts of ransomware and go all the way up to some of the more major ones. This is ransomware that infected one of the new LG smart TVs. It got infected because a smart TV is really just a computer that displays a screen. It's an operating system. It is a computer, and it got infected with ransomware. Interestingly, in this particular story here, the owner of this device was a techie and went to try to restore the device and restore the operating system. And he had to call through customer support and find all the firmware resets. But effectively, the ransomware broke his TV and destroyed a couple hundred, maybe $1,000 device. So this is what we get to look forward to with IoT. It's going to infect, even accidentally, our microwaves and refrigerators and video cameras and all sorts of things. But this is just one example of it, where it's going. Just a step up from that, when we're talking more IoT type of devices, this was a hotel in Europe. They had a vendor that was responsible for implementing and managing their cards, the door locks on the hotel room, the doors with the little key cards. It got infected with ransomware, and while their guests could leave the room, they never could get back into the room because the whole system was locked down with ransomware. The hotel paid the ransom the first time, and even the second time, but the third time they had about enough because all their guests were inconvenienced, and they started the process of removing all the electronic locks and replacing them back with physical keys because they were done with this. They're done with tech. So this is how it can impact an entire hotel in a business at a high-end hotel. A little bit more serious than that, and I'm not sure how many of you have heard of this particular story, but this was a particular ransomware attack that a couple of years ago now that impacted the mass transit system in San Francisco City and held it hostage over a weekend. There was an outbreak of ransomware, and it affected a few thousand, I think it was 10 to 20,000 machines. And then all the operators, and it impacted the ticketing system, so no one could buy tickets. So technically, all the vehicles and transportation systems, like the buses and trains, could technically keep going, but no one could buy tickets. And the city was generating a couple $100,000 per day. So what they did was, because they didn't want to pay the ransom, they knew they could recover, but it was going to take them several days or weeks to do it. So instead, they lost a weekend's worth of revenue instead of paying the ransom, rather than keep people from riding the mass transit system. So again, we have things like this, important utilities, important public services that are connected to the internet, and now they're at risk of ransomware and extortion. There was one, and this story here went way under the radar for some reason. It was found out later that during President Trump's inauguration, 70%, I have to read this one here because it's very meaningful. Criminals infected 70% of storage devices tied to closed circuit TVs in DC 8 days before the inauguration of President Trump. Basically, 70% of their CCTVs were blind that were supposed to be used for security, and no one noticed until well after the inauguration. So all of a sudden, in a very real way, we have a national security risk here with respect to malware and ransomware. Here's another one here. A ransomware attack hit a small county's 911 system and held it down. They had to go back to paper, and it slowed down. Services were still there, but emergency services were slowed down because their entire 911 system was infected with ransomware. You imagine that. All of a sudden, you're a 911 worker, people are calling, you can't use your computer system to deploy services, and everything slows down. Now all of a sudden, critical services are now putting lives at risk. We can't have this. Another one here, this has to do with a police station. Police stations, once you get over the fact that these are police stations, they actually operate like small businesses and small IT shops where their IT support is very, very limited. So what that means is when they collect investigations data, they store it on computers and backup systems and devices like everybody else does in every organization. So ransomware they got infected with ransomware, and a lot of their investigations data was encrypted. Now, given that they're a police station, they didn't want to pay the ransom, and the IT person there said, well, we have backups, don't worry. But what they didn't realize is that the backups were not sufficient, they were corrupted, and they didn't restore. So they wiped the data in the restore process before they tested the backups. And even if they were to pay the ransom, there was no more encrypted data to unlock. So they actually lost hundreds of investigations worth of data. And effectively, these criminals are, would-be criminals are going to go free because of this ransomware event. So another thing to be mindful of. And the one that was most important to me, these types of attacks really bother me. I was actually in Europe at the time talking about ransomware when this broke out. This ransomware attack ripped through the National Health Service system in Europe, the system responsible for all their healthcare, and was locking down hospitals and preventing patients from getting care from their doctors and their healthcare professionals, including brain scanning devices. They had to delay heart monitoring and brain scan surgeries and things like this. So it's 2,800 of patient appointments had to be canceled or delayed when the system shut down for 48 hours. So now all of a sudden, just like before, real consequences in the real world as a result of cyber attacks. All right. So where does all this stuff come from? The best evidence we have is 75% of the ransomware is coming out of Russia. This is their business model. This is how they like to do things because it's very, very profitable. All right. So very quickly, to sum this up, what can we learn? Not all critical systems are backed up, because if they were, we wouldn't have to pay the ransom, or wouldn't have to. This issue wouldn't be as vital as it is. The current antivirus software that's out there on the market generally, especially the consumer stuff, part of the directness, it sucks. It just doesn't work. Infection rates are rising fast. The ransom demands are rising because the bad guys are figuring out they can charge more and more money. I'm seeing CFOs or their law firms having to learn how to transact in Bitcoin, if nothing else, but to pay ransoms. The bad guys are innovating in their business models. They're being very specific in who they're targeting with what types of ransomware and how much to charge them. And then also, as Jeffrey mentioned, there's been some cyber insurance reimbursement. So there's some characteristics of the market that we can learn. All right, so we're going to go in. We're going to take a little departure and talk about kidnapping, the market of kidnapping and ransom, because that business model, the way the bad guys operate here, can teach us a lot about the ransomware business model in the online world. So when I started looking at the whole kidnapping and ransom space, KNR for short, like any good researcher would, I started watching all the Hollywood movies on hostage and hostage negotiations. So I was watching Captain Phillips and The Negotiator and things like that. And while it's dramatized for Hollywood, of course, it was actually, when I started to read the real world accounts, it was actually pretty accurate. One of the interesting stories, I put this up there because I find the history interesting. Julius Caesar was once kidnapped when he was 25 years old. He was captured by Sicilian pirates and held for ransom. The ransom at the time was 20 talents of silver, and if my conversions are right, it was about $250,000 and converted. Caesar, being the type of guy that he was, laughed in their faces and reminded them and informed them who he was and that he was worth a lot more. So he said they should really ask for 50 talents of silver. And then while he was in custody, he would begin to order them around, tell them when to be quiet, that he was writing or whatever he was doing. And interestingly enough, they complied as a result of him telling them, well, I'm a much more important person than you originally thought. So what happened later is that the ransom was paid, and Caesar deployed his navy, and all the pirates were subsequently crucified. So I guess he got the last laugh. We have other stories of the one that's related here. This is a billionaire out of Taiwan that was recently kidnapped and was held hostage, and he wasn't treated particularly well. The ransom was paid at $1.68 million to secure his release. But the interesting part to me in this particular story is that the ransom was paid in Bitcoin, not in dollars or any other type of hard currency. It was actually paid in Bitcoin. Subsequently, Taiwan actually outlawed Bitcoin after this scenario, thinking that it was going to stop the problem. I don't think it will. So if we're going to have TNR in the world, I can see the bad guys stop asking for cash like dollars and start asking for more electronic currency. I think this is going to be the way the market goes, because it's much easier for the bad guys to get away with their ill-gotten cash. Now, where we're going to spend the most of the rest of our time here is going over high seas piracy. And because this story here, when I started reading all the accounts and the economic models behind it, this actually is very eerily similar to ransomware. The parallels are striking. Now, one of the things to immediately recognize is, maybe it's not news to you guys, it certainly was to me, is that, piracy, high seas piracy is still a real thing, particularly out of the Somalia region. Most of the Somalia, the Somalian pirates are really just fishermen who traded nets for guns, as the story goes. They've learned that ransom is more profitable than robbery, and that rather than squandering their loot, they're actually reinvesting in equipment and training. So there's actually good articles about this stuff here, about the economics and business model of Somali pirates. And here's some graphics here. So to put this in context of why a Somali fisherman would go to be a pirate and risk life and limb, you have to understand that a Somali generally earns about $600 a year. But if they successfully conduct a high seas piracy operation and make their gains, they can earn up to about $10,000 just in one hijacking. So they're already in Somalia. Just living there is risk life and limb. So why not go do some high seas piracy and make some real cash? So a lot of them do exactly that. Now, one thing we learned from the business model here is that fewer than 1 in 3 hijacking attempts is successful. The ship's captains, the victims of the targets, they'll have certain maneuvers where they'll try to ward off ships by doing serpentine motions to try to tip over and capsize a fast-moving skiff that's trying to get on board. And what everybody knows, both the target and the pirates, is that if the attackers don't board within 15 minutes, a nearby naval ship will send a helicopter gunship to blow the skiff out of the water. So once the hijackers are spotted, there's a 15-minute clock because the captain's going to call the Navy, and the pirates got to get on fast. So there's actually the time is against the bad guys when the operation is going. So that's how they design a lot of their safeguard mechanisms, is to increase the time for the Navy to get there, or to give the Navy more time to get there. And also once the pirates get on the ship, the crews are trained not to resist, because what no side wants is death or injury, because that makes negotiations after the fact tricky, and the payoff isn't as good. There's just always problems. So it's a strange way that people look at the world. So now this is the business model characteristics here. I'm not trying to motivate anybody to get into the high seas piracy business, but I'm presenting myself on how they look at it. So if you want to get into the high seas piracy business, you'll start off needing about 50 to 250K in seed capital, because there are investors in this world. You need a crew of 12 to 24 men with a variety of skills. You'll need equipment like speedboats, a larger ship to launch boats, your skiffs. You'll need food, so you need caterers. You'll need ladders, ropes, intelligence. You'll need weapons and communications. You'll need intelligence on how to select your target by their cargo and owner, because certain ships and certain crews are worth more than others. And then you'll need a trustworthy financial system for money laundering. So just collecting the cash isn't enough. You'll have to be able to collect your cash and put it in a place where it can be distributed without getting stolen once again. So who are these people? Their characteristics behind them. You have the tribal elders in Somalia that liaison with the outside world. You have the financiers who finance the operations for high seas piracy. You have the commander of the actual mission that gets the crew, you'll marshal the resources, you'll organize all operations. You have to protect the commander, so you need a security squad. You'll need a crew for the mothership that launches the skiffs. And then because Somalis are Somalian, they don't always speak English, so you need a really good, competent negotiator who is English speaking that serves as a point of contact for the hostage takers. So this is the type of crew that you need for a successful high seas piracy operation. Again, not terribly different from ransomware. A negotiation process for high seas piracy may take days, weeks, or months. Negotiations on the defense side, the hostage side, are often handled by professional KNR consultants who are ex-military or intelligence officers. And this is a word that you might know from your world, not necessarily from mine, is there cannot be any supernormal profits. There can't be any supernormal payouts. No one wants it. It ruins it for everybody if a victim gets anxious and pays too much, because it impacts everybody else down the road. And so a lot of times when we look at the cases, what the hostage takers will take is usually about a tenth of what they originally asked for when it's all said and done. Now, how do the bad guys get their money? Oh, go ahead. All good? Hello?
We lost you. You there?
Oh, yeah, I'm here. You get there?
Yep.
Okay. One new technique, not new technique, it's kind of old by now, but how do the bad guys in high seas piracy actually get their money? Typically, the way it's done is they pack $100 notes and drop it into a big buoy into the ocean with a GPS system, and then the pirates come pick it up. So imagine you're airdropping millions of dollars into the middle of the ocean in a buoy, guided by a GPS parachute. So that's why I'm thinking that Bitcoin is going to be the way they're going to transfer from now on. Now, once the bad guys get away with their cash, they have to reimburse their suppliers. They have to pay back their financiers. They have to give a little tribute to the elders in Somalia, and then the rest of the profits are divvied up by shares amongst the crew. And that's the way it works. It's really simple. Now, on the prevention side, what are they doing to stop this stuff? A lot of the ships will now have armed private security guards on board to start firing on the skiffs. The ships are hardened with vessels, and they'll take evasive action. There was a policy change, at least in Somalia, at a national level, so the high seas piracy is no longer condoned or turned a blind eye to. And then there was also number 4, which I was reading a lengthy report on. There was preemptive action by the combined navies in the region, which meant was they found the bad guys' hideout and they used helicopter gunships to blow up all of their equipment. And that set the bad guys, the pirates, back several years. It actually reduced it by about 80% once you destroyed all their equipment. Now, interestingly enough, Britney Spears comes into the act. If you want to go on YouTube, there's a really funny video. A lot of the Somalians are of Islamic descent or religion, and they really don't like Western pop culture music. So there's actually a great video on YouTube where a helicopter gunship is blaring Britney Spears, "Hit Me Baby One More Time," as the skiffs are coming in. And it really, really angers and annoys the pirates, and they actually turn around. So anyway. Here's the quote here. It's covered by NBC News. Her songs were chosen by the security team because they thought the pirates would hate them the most. You can kind of relate. These guys can't stand Western culture or music, making Britney's hits perfect. There was some use of Eminem too. As soon as the pirates get a blast of Britney, they move on as quickly as they can. So anyway, Britney Spears can combat high seas piracy. So we've covered a lot of ground. We've heard a lot about ransomware, a lot about high seas piracy and KNR. What does the combined learnings teach us about ransomware? What are the similarities between KNR and ransomware? One is we have a sentient adversary, meaning the adversary is not malware, so to speak. It is a sentient person. It's a person behind a computer screen on the other side that's acting logically, rationally, and is adaptive. That's very important to understand. When you're a victim, you know it. When your data is encrypted, you know it. When you're kidnapped, you know it, or somebody you love is kidnapped, you know it. Time after the incident is on the adversary's side, meaning you don't have your loved one, or you don't have your goods, or you don't have your data. And the bad guy can wait as long as they really want to, until they get paid. The adversaries in both cases will leverage fear and anxiety to get the victim to pay as much as they possibly will and as fast as they possibly can. The economic term for this transaction is called a bilateral monopoly, meaning there's exactly one buyer of the goods and exactly one seller of the goods. You can't get your loved one from someone else. You can't get your data from someone else, and no one else will buy either your data or your loved one. So the buyer and seller are heavily motivated to make a deal in one way, shape, or form. The market value of the asset is incredibly subjective, and there's very little to go on. You can only go by previous KNR experiences and not the true value of the asset that's being transacted. In both cases, the victims are targeted. A lot of times in ransomware this is true, but not always, so I put it in there. And then finally, this is a really interesting one. If the adversaries break an agreement, they'll ruin the business for everybody. Meaning if you pay the ransom and you don't get your loved ones or your goods back, subsequent operations, at least of that crew, are not going to go very well because no one's going to trust that they'll come through. So in the case of ransomware and KNR, in the vast majority of cases, when the ransom is paid, the bad guys keep their word. It's a very interesting incentives model because the way the bad guys look at it in both cases, this is not a one and done exercise. This is their business model. This is their way of life. So they're going to do it again. So that way, that actually keeps everybody generally honest. So what are the important differences between KNR and ransomware? One, ransomware requires far less upfront cost in logistics. You actually can buy a ransomware kit, and I think Jeffrey showed it to you. You can buy a ransomware kit online that's highly effective for a few $100. That's all you really need. Ransomware is far less risky for the adversary. You don't have to hijack a ship. You don't have to hold a gun. You don't have to fear the cops knocking down your door or anybody shooting at you. You're literally sitting behind a computer. You're going to create a ransomware campaign and distribute. That's it. Ransomware hostage, the data is not a witness. There's no people involved, so it's much easier that way. You don't have anybody with a feed. You don't have anybody to rat you out. The data doesn't tell anything. Ransomware scales. When you're a high seas pirate, you can only conduct one operation at a time. Ransomware, you can affect dozens, hundreds of organizations at the same time. We've seen it from the ransomware world, ransomware cases we've had in recent memory that impact hundreds of organizations across the world, and each one can be negotiated in parallel. Speaking of the negotiations, the process is way, way faster. A lot of times the ransomware campaigns, if there's going to be a payout, it's going to happen in a couple of days. You don't, like in high seas piracy, you don't have to wait more than a couple of days, weeks, or months. Their business is held down, it's encrypted, it's dead. They're going to pay quickly or they're not going to pay ever. So it's very fast for the bad guys, which is why it's attractive. And then finally, ransomware is easy to pay logistically because ransomware, generally, 99% of the cases, they're asking for Bitcoin versus cash. So that's the world, and that's why ransomware came out of nowhere economically very, very quickly. So what can we expect from ransomware going forward? What I'm suggesting is almost like predicting the present in many ways. Ransomware campaigns will be increasingly professionalized and well-funded. The malware will get better because they're going to reinvest their ill-gotten gains in more higher-end malware. They're going to streamline their operations. So there's somebody that's going to find the exploit, somebody that's going to create the malware, somebody that's going to run the campaign, somebody that's going to do the negotiation. So they're going to split roles out just like high seas piracy to have a supply chain and a business model. There's going to be the emergence of professional ransomware negotiations on the victim side. So if you're a large bank or some other large organizer, and you have to negotiate a ransom because you can't recover the systems that you have, that you're going to need to call somebody and say, I need you to negotiate this ransom. They're asking for $1 million, but we don't want to pay $1 million. What can you do it for? So the victim in this case is that they don't really know what Bitcoin is. They're not going to know they're not going to have any experience negotiating a ransomware payment with Russian, Ukrainian operators. Cyber insurers, you got to believe, are probably going to require their clients to keep ransomware policies secret. Maybe that's already the case. You guys will know more than me. And then adversaries will increasingly target backup systems because it increases the odds that they'll get a payout. So what that means is that when the bad guys infect your systems, they'll encrypt the live systems and do everything they can to destroy your backup so you have zero ability to recover. So that paints a very new business requirement. Is not only do you have to secure your live systems, you have to secure your backup systems as well, because the bad guys will deprive you of it. So what can we do about all this stuff, technologically speaking? We have to be able to back up, and we have to test our backups, and do not destroy encrypted data before we test those backups. That's huge. The world has not learned to back up its systems by and large. We can do fast recovery via virtualization. We're going to have to get a lot better at patching and disabling Office macros. So for you guys here sitting at the table, if you want to protect yourself, make sure your systems are patched, not only operating systems, but your applications as well. And if you can tolerate it, disable your Office macros, because that's how they're bypassing most AV, with their Office macros. So if you can live without macros, that'll help you out a lot. We're going to need law enforcement's help to investigate and arrest ransomware groups. We can only do so much to combat their tools and their tactics. We're going to have to go after them directly and arrest them. Easier said than done. There's probably going to be formations of insurance syndicates for ransomware pricing, just like in the KNR world and high seas piracy. And then we're probably going to have to start listening to the security guidance from the cyber insurers after they start getting some really good actuarial data on what the security controls should be, the things that really do reduce the risk. I haven't seen too much of this just yet, but I'm pretty sure it's coming. Now, the last slide here speaks to the business model and the opportunity for you all here, really, perhaps Jeffrey as well. Here's the quote. In 2010, 148 million of ransoms were paid to pirates. On the other hand, $1.85 billion were spent on insurances to cover piracy, 10 times more than the actual ransoms that were given to pirates. That will probably take shape here. There will probably be 10 times the amount spent on information security products and services, 10 times more spent on that than the actual payment of ransom. So while the bad guys are going to make a lot, the defenders, us, those in the room, the vendors are probably going to have a 10 times bigger market. So that's really up for grabs because no one wants their business halted for any particular reason. So with that, it was a little fast, it was a little rushed. I apologize for that, but we made it through. I know. Hopefully, I didn't bore you along the way.
Anybody have any questions? Nothing?
So you said next gen is the support, belt and suspenders, having insurance, and looking at somebody's system, correct?
Yes.
How is that's available now?
Yes.
And so, in the application process used to be a fill out, and is the application fill out and say, we're going to send our team to kind of passively look at you? That's also part of that process now.
Yeah, so it takes about 7 seconds. So you answer 8, 9 questions. Have you been? Do you know? Do you crimp? Yes, no, sometimes. Do you back up? Do you have dual authorization for wire transfers over 25 grand? And then it's past the scan, and there's a deep dive, and they use threat intelligence. And if the risk looks good, we'll produce proposals. If the risk looks suspect, then we'll go back for secondary review, and it may get through. It just means they saw something that they weren't comfortable with. Or they'll come back and say, hey, here's some subjectivities, and a couple of the most frequent ones we get. And Jeremiah, maybe you can elaborate on this. It has to do with remote access using Microsoft Office. I guess, Jared, there's like a switch. Is it RDU switch? That
I think it's called like RDP or Windows Remote sharing of desktops, and that's usually a major risk because organizations will leave that out there, and bad guys can just log into your system over the internet.
Yeah, so that means that people are accessing your internet around your firewall. Basically, they're not protected. So if they're sitting in Starbucks, there's risk there. We also have issues with exposed servers, websites, where they're not protected. And then we find a lot, as I mentioned earlier, we find a lot of email credentials for sale. And so come back and say, hey, here's things fixed. Here's some ways to fix them, and then you're off the races. So I think there are a couple facilities doing that now that we're working with. I expect more and more of the insurers to start going this direction, or they're going to lose out, in my view. There are a lot of the ones that we all know who write a ton of premium. They're probably going to be slower, to come around. But I'm convinced, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm convinced that that's where it needs to go.
So once you make a submission, you are already doing it?
Yeah, it just gets done. Our partners do them.
Mm-hmm.
And so we work with Munich Re and Swiss Re, and so they've got teams there that actually do that stuff. So I mean, it's automatic. You put in I can pull it up now and put something in for you, but I mean it'll take seconds for the intelligence to come back.
To chime in on that one, on the market opportunity there. So, for the last forever, when business are doing business together, one side will require the other side to carry business insurance, property and casualty, uptime insurance, and all that kind of stuff for the real world. Over the last 2 years, I've seen a lot more, especially in my business, where I'm trying to sell to a customer, and they're selling, well, before I do business with you, you have to have cyber insurance. And so there's actually become a market pressure as a default before anything bad happens, before businesses will do business together, that both sides have cyber insurance.
Yeah, I think it's important to note here real quick that these are not invasive. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jared, I may have learned something hanging out with you. these are more like pen tests, where they're trying, they're seeing where you're vulnerable, as opposed to what they call vulnerability scans, where I think they actually, you have to give them permission, to go into your system. These are just penetration tests.
Yeah, depending on the type of relationship two businesses are conducting, the customer will say, well, I'm not going to do business with you. I'm not going to let you store my data unless I can test your security first. So there comes the pen test. What I'm suggesting that comes after that, one more requirement is that your pen test will show whatever it'll show. Maybe you'll fix stuff, but if all else fails, that if my data gets compromised when stored on your system, I want to make sure that I get a payout. Therefore, I want you covering insurance that covers my losses.
Anything else? Anybody?
I work in banking.
So you're all over this.
Yeah, so like majority of all of the fraud that we detect in cash flow funds are all through closing attorneys. That's really where it happens.
Is that the only escrow fund?
Yeah, it's like we're at a point now where we get sent information about the client, and then we also call the attorney's office.
Yep.
Because what happens is attorneys are like the most vulnerable point. They hack that, change one more thing, and then we call the client, like, there's information for your closing. Like, yeah, sounds good. They don't really know it's going to an escrow account.
Chair Brian, who was just speaking, is with J.P. Morgan.
Yeah, I missed the question. Sorry.
So I was just saying the
No, just comment.
fraud that we see or that we've prevented has been where the weak point was in the closing attorney for transactions. So they send wire instructions, and their email system's been compromised.
Yeah, sorry. I can hear Jeffrey better. Jeffrey, you mind restating the question? If there was a question.
Well, it's not really a question. It's not really a question, Jared. Just a comment about how it seems in financial transactions, the lawyers are the weak part of the link, and so the banks are going to lawyers and saying, "Hey, if we're going to do business with you, you got to step up."
Yeah, that's generally how. Yeah, that's in my experience. Yes.
Yes.
Question on enterprise software with employee information, with money transactions, bank accounts, and all of that. While we're a small company, so we don't even have an IT department.
Yep.
And then we're trying to protect ourselves, and of course now we have all these employees trying to put things on the cloud. Right? We have systems. So what do you see the risk more or less compared to in-house server? That we think we're more possible in that sense, but we also small data. So we are lower risk in that sense.
Got it.
While in the cloud, for better protection, now all my users can be anywhere using free Wi-Fi. They need access. They need one.
Sure.
Sure.
Derek, can you talk to the cloud? The question has to do with the cloud and is it more secure and relative to a company storing things on their own server?
Yeah, sure. The cloud is not secure. None of them are, and there's many derivatives of that answer. But the reality is, it's 10 times more secure, often enough, than whatever the customer can do on their own. The way to think about the cloud is it's at least as secure as its most demanding customer. Does that make sense?
No.
Okay. Let's say a cloud provider has 10 customers. In order to sell to those 10 customers, it will end up being as secure as its most demanding customer, or that customer would not have signed up. Generally, that's way more secure operationally than whenever these customers could do on their own time and dime. For instance, Microsoft Office 365 or Gmail. Those systems are incredibly secure relative to any Exchange environment and any IT operation. I think the only one on the planet that can actually secure and protect Microsoft Exchange is Microsoft.
Jared, thank you.
One more thing about the cloud that everybody misses is that the cloud has no delete button. Once you put things in the cloud, you press delete, you have no knowledge or transparency in if the data is actually gone. So you have a risk forever when you put data in the cloud, and that's important to classify.
Jared, can't thank you enough.
My pleasure. But thanks everybody for your time.
All right, take care. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming out to join us today. Our next Lunch and Learn is scheduled for Tuesday, October 23rd, with Wayne Rivers with the Family Business Institute, who will be our speaker, and the topic is business transition. So be on the lookout for an invitation coming your way very soon, and we hope to see you there. Thank you.
And I felt like when I was asking questions, I was like talking to the guy. I was like, Phil, you're in the clouds, dude.